Hello everybody, welcome back to Unique Arts. I am Costco Picasso. Today we'll be continuing with 19th century art, and as you could probably tell by the title, we will be going with more Romanticism. I guess we're a little bit over halfway done with Romanticism, perhaps? Something like that. We still have some more after this, but we are going to be looking at Romanticism in Germany. Just to give you a general idea, Romanticism, you could probably almost say, starts in Germany. At least the first romantic group of thinkers is in Germany. It's in the small university town of Jena. And we get figures like Caroline Schlegel, August Wilhelm, Friedrich von Schlegel as well, Novalis, Fichte, Schelling, Schleiermacher, Holsten, and Holderlin. And those predate even some of the romantic groups in Heidelberg and Berlin. Kind of just a group of German idealists. But we're going to look at just a few artists. This probably shouldn't take too long, but we'll go ahead and we'll dive right in. So Romanticism in Germany. There's a work right there who we're going to look at this later. That is by pretty much the most famous German romantic painter. And this is also a quote from him. His name is Casper David Friedrich. He said, "The artist should not only paint what he sees before him, but also what he sees within him. If he does not see anything within him, he should give up painting what he sees before him." Which I think is relatively fair, and I think you can get that idea with Romanticism as well. You see a lot, you're supposed to get a greater sense of feeling, of certain ideas and whatnot. It's not just about painting what's in front of you. And in that way, I feel like it is almost more impactful than the Impressionist and whatnot, because we often are just painting what's in front of us, even if it's not super representational in many ways, but still. So, this is, again, art in the age of Romanticism is not really so much a strict style, but more of a sensibility. Again, the ideals, just to rehash if you haven't watched the other videos, the ideals of the Enlightenment seem to have failed us. We got, instead of progress and social reform, there was a lot of turmoil. That French Revolution gave rise to war throughout Europe. Napoleon gained power and claimed rights as the emperor, and we get the end of France as a republic, which didn't last very long, but started in the Napoleonic Wars and occupied most of Europe until about 1813. So those wars also helped accelerate the Industrial Revolution, so we get waves of people leaving the countryside to work in manufacturing, which is not particularly fun, if I'm being honest, but experienced oppressive working conditions, very poor housing, very dirty, very crowded. Kind of get this period of crisis. We get these new ideals arising. We're kind of turning inward, sometimes looking at faith in the individual rather than society, which I think personally is fair. But we get this emphasis on powerful emotion, intuition, this unrestrained creative genius. Definitely as opposed to rules, standards, logic, stuff like the neoclassical ideas. But we are definitely acknowledging violence, suffering, chaos, ugliness, rather than idealism. Uniqueness is valued. Also, the exotic is valued. We get these awesome forces of nature and nationalism about appreciating one's personal language, culture, landscape, as opposed to the classical or stuff like that. Romanticism, again, is more of an attitude. So, and we do get great people, as I mentioned in the introduction to this course, really, that we get great music from Beethoven, Berlioz, Franz Liszt, Frédéric Chopin. We get writers like Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, William Wordsworth, Victor Hugo, Herman Melville, Edgar Allan Poe, which I hope are all names you have already heard before. But again, this is just a good general idea of some of the stuff we have a fascination with during the age of Romanticism. Feel free to pause that if you need to, if you haven't seen the other lectures. Okay, so we're going to look at, relatively briefly, not as well known. We're going to save Casper David Friedrich for last this time, but we're literally only looking at 3 artists, so I encourage you to go ahead and look at more. But this is Philipp Otto Runge. So this is a self-portrait from 1805, pretty youthful, pretty handsome, I would say. And here are some paper cutouts. This is stuff that we see a little bit of leading up to photography, which is going to be born here around 1840, really. And we do like to do tracings and cutouts and stuff like that as well, though. These prints, cyanotypes. These are not cyanotypes, but cyanotypes are quite similar to this. This is Scheren Schneta. Here's a couple of these. So some of the artists, of course, are looking at, we like to look at nature. We like to look at these things and get them more properly detailed in our paintings. These are kind of just studies, you could say, right? More. That one. It's almost reminiscent of Albrecht Dürer and the German, like, Northern Renaissance. A few hundred years prior to this, where we look at stuff like this, where we do studies on tufts of grass, very interesting. But here's Maurice Sendax. He's got the etchings and stuff, the imagery for some of Grimm's fairy tales. Grimm's fairy tales are going to become very popular during this time. And we have, of course, Lesson of the Nightingale on the right from Runge himself. So we get the oak leaves, of course, that we've been just looking at, and we're putting them here. We get the puto, the little angels, pretty much, with birds, lilies that are also, we were studying in the corner with the stamens. So we get these marginal decorations with circular frames. I feel like this looks very much 18th, 19th century, right? I feel like that's what we see this in. That's the time frame that comes to mind, at least for me. Here is a portrait of the artist's parents and children. There's kind of a stark juxtaposition here. You can see the study of the plants here. They look very detailed. They look very nice. But the kids are so young and innocent and sweet. They don't necessarily look happy necessarily, but look at that. Look how grumpy the parents look. Either way, but we get the tiger lily, two children, something looming over the children. Kind of a reference to Mozart here. But the point is the point here is honestly that artists quote each other pretty constantly, even across different mediums. So you've probably been around people that quote from movies or videos, right? And perhaps most common is very famous movies, but also current memes. And sometimes you may have no idea what's going on, and that's fair enough with some of these images too, right? But it's fun to be in the know. It's fun to be acquainted with it. The more you know, the more conversant you can be. So, and as far as art is concerned, especially if you're an artist yourself, I'm not. It's kind of important to be conversant in the language of art and understand how artists quote each other, even contemporary times, but also throughout time. You quote artists, famous artists from the past. I don't recommend quoting the famous artists from today because their work is not very good, generally speaking. There is good art out there today. It's just not the stuff promoted by the art establishment, unfortunately. But Runge liked to paint children. Here's also a portrait of the Holzenbeck children. The style is a bit odd. Honestly, I almost think of it as very Northern European. Like, I would feel like you see this in Germany and Flanders, stuff like that. And it doesn't feel Italian. It doesn't feel part of that classical tradition. Of course, we have proper modeling and stuff like that. We do have representational art. It's not as flat as it used to be, but it still feels relatively flat, right? It still almost feels like this could be a painting from the Northern Renaissance. This painting's a few hundred years younger. So we are still have regional differences, right? Germany, perhaps the most recognizably regional, different, independent, and unique within its own right. I think it is a nice aesthetic, a bit different. Perhaps homely is a good word for it, how we might describe it here in the States. But regardless, there are some, of course, other things going on. Color theory is a big thing around this time, and I don't really want to go over it. I'm not an artist anyway, but here, just to give you an idea, this stuff is prominent. Artists are thinking about this as well, and perhaps you can get an idea of that here, too, with his mourning. So Runge himself was kind of a mystical, deeply Christian person, turn of a deeply Christian and mystical turn of mind, and his artistic work kind of expresses notions of the harmony of the universe, through symbolism of color, he's fond of that, but also symbolism of form and numbers. He considered blue, yellow, and red to be symbolic of the Christian Trinity, equated blue with God and the night, red with the morning and evening and Jesus, and then yellow with the Holy Spirit. So with that in mind, I think you can probably see this in a different light now, this work here by Runge. He also wrote poetry, which I think everyone should do. And not that you'll be good, because not that I'm good anyway, but still. He also wrote poetry, and pretty much his end was that he planned for a series of paintings called The Times of Day, designed to be seen in a special building and viewed to accompany the accompaniment of music and poetry. This concept was kind of common, actually, to Romantic artists. It's kind of a romantic notion, right, just to think about it, right? But who tried to achieve a total art, or a fusion between, like, all forms of art. But in 1803, Runge had large format engravings made of the drawings of the Time of Day series that became commercially successful, and a set of which he presented to Goethe, who wrote Faust. And he painted 2 versions of Morning and Kunsthalle in Hamburg, but also the others did not advance beyond drawings. So Morning was the start of a new type of landscape, one of religion and of emotion. So this is, right, he would consider this a landscape. This is definitely different than a landscape we may traditionally see. But I think you can get the religious sense. This is reminiscent of some religious works. So interesting. He's trying to meld pretty much religion and emotion into landscape. We're trying to reinvent landscape here. I don't think I prefer it personally, but it is interesting, and I kind of like it still. So that's for Runge. Another guy, we get Ludwig Richter. This is a painting of him by Wilhelm von Kugelgen. I'm not very good. I don't speak German. I would like to be able to speak German. I have a lot of German ancestry, which is quite common for Americans. But either way, he was a painter as well as an etcher, and he's definitely the most popular artist of his time for the mid-19th century. So he's a little bit later than Runge and Casper David Friedrich. He is often described as like typically German and homely, perhaps is a good word for him as well. Kind of like the Tales of Grimm are for literature, Richter is for their art. He's a good representation of Romanticism, but also Biedermeier, which is the Biedermeier style, which is kind of like part of the art that appealed to, that is Biedermeier, if you're wondering. It's a style that was kind of the art that appealed to a growing middle class in places mostly Central Europe, as what is that is acquainted with. German-speaking areas in particular. Okay, we're just going to look at a couple for him. So he is born in Dresden, dies in Dresden. Dresden's a beautiful city. I mean, I've never been, but you know. These are some mountains in northern Czechia and southwest Poland. It's a bit different, right? So this is a landscape. The figuring itself down here, if you are acquainted with Northern Renaissance work, this seems very reminiscent of works from Peter Bruegel, those Northern Renaissance men. Like, the figuring is very similar all these years later. And the landscape, though, gives you a pretty different mood. It's a bit more sad, melancholy, perhaps. And the pool itself is incredibly dark. It's darker than the clouds, but the clouds are still dark. You get this sense of that, it's probably going to start raining any moment. You do get the distant, very distant sun and sky that is bright. We are focusing more on the landscape here, and this could be part of that sentiment of German unification. Germany is not united. They're different states, and Germany will not be united until the 1860s. Some people say 1871 with Otto von Bismarck, but Germany is not united now. So perhaps that's the brighter future for Germany. We do get a lot of German idealism during the Romantic era. But this is a place that people might recognize. And of course everyone likes a dog in the paintings. But you almost get the idea that things haven't changed much for the last few hundred years. Technology has advanced, and technology is going to start booming here. But the this feels very German, just like it would have felt very German if it was painted a few hundred years prior. And so, very interesting. I feel like Germany is perhaps unique in that way, that it doesn't change as much. And I think perhaps in some regards, perhaps it was easiest for them to have those romantic notions. You know, they're already seeing stuff that is very much similar, and we're going to keep doing it. And we love Germany of the past, but we still also want, a lot of us want that unification. And it will come shortly. And then, of course, other things will come after it, which aren't great, but still. Okay, and then just a little bit of more Richter, bridal procession in a spring landscape. Then this again makes me think of the Bruegel peasant wedding. And so that peasant wedding has now taken itself outside, taken itself on the road. We're coming out of this very lush, mystical, very grim, fairy tale-esque forest. We get the children in the foreground with the dog again. And it's very dreamlike almost, right? We're kind of turning and transforming real events into a fairy tale, or just into dreamlike memories. And it's very appealing. I feel like it gives you that romantic sense, especially with this building in the distance here in the top left, but also in the top right. It's harder to see. Perhaps that's the church the wedding is coming from, buried in the trees here. But very lovely. There's a lot of focus on children at this time. That kind of carries over from the Enlightenment. Focus on nurturing, but also the state of nature. And obviously, I think you can see an appreciation of nature here as well. But very dreamlike again. Quite lovely, though, I think. And then just to give you an idea, because he was an etcher, he did a lot of etchings for books. This is actually for Schiller's Glock, a very famous German poem. This is Abendruhe, which pretty much is the German word for meaning like the calm of evening. I find German has a lot of words that are just, we don't have words for in English, stuff like that. But yeah, I think the only thing that perhaps takes away from the calm in many ways is this little kid playing his flute down here in the bottom right, but maybe not. I guess the calm doesn't necessarily have to mean no noise, but still, this gives you an idea of etchings and stuff like this. Stuff like this helps you become popular as an artist as well. And just keep in mind, if you are an artist, if you do illustrations for books and stuff like that, it helps, right? But on to Portrait of Friedrich. This is by another von Kugelgen, but this is Gerard, not Wilhelm. But still, this is Casper David Friedrich. So he is the most famous German romantic painter today, and also of the earlier 19th century. So he was born in the German Baltic coast, which was actually under Swedish control at the time. Seems funnily enough to me, I don't know. But he did study in Copenhagen, but he did settle in Dresden as well, like Richter will later. Okay, but this is Monk by the Sea. Very famous, almost Turner-esque if you watch the lecture Romanticism in England, with just like the haze and the atmosphere just dominates this whole canvas. The only thing to compare it to, that give you that scale, is this tiny monk. He's the title, but he seems so insignificant, right? And he's very small figure. He's dwarfed by the landscape. Is perhaps a reference to the Industrial Revolution, man taming nature. What an impossible task, and yet it feels like we almost do it, during the Industrial Revolution. Here we're almost showing that nature can't be controlled, which is true as well. So this give you this sense of the sublime, that the landscape is beautiful, but it's also awesome and terrifying. So we're trying to also show God's presence in nature rather than in a church. This is a monk who is still a Christian figure, but he's kind of, he's worshiping outside. So this also perhaps was referenced and influenced by Gotthard Ludwig Kossegarten, who was a theologian that delivered sermons on the shore of the Baltic Sea. And of course, the Baltic Sea is something Friedrich himself would be acquainted with, having been born there. And this is pretty much its companion piece to Monk by the Sea. This is Abbey in the Oak Forest. So of course it makes sense we're doing the studies outside when this is the state of our church, right? The mood is very silent. It's very bleak. We get this somber sky at twilight. Feels very cold. It's obviously winter time with the snow on the ground, but everything is dead or dying for the most part, right? So also think about what kind of abbey this is. This is a medieval abbey. It's crumbling. This is about the ages past. Human achievement always crumbles, generally speaking. It's what we got to aim towards, those eternal achievements, right? We have a funeral procession coming through here. Perhaps kind of hard to tell. They mimic what could just be headstones, but these are monks coming through the bottom center. And we have a procession. Thought to perhaps be from the monk from the other image, Monk by the Sea. Perhaps it's his funeral. But how significant are the people? You can hardly tell they're there, right? So what's more significant is nature. Nature outlives the achievements of man. There are some symbols of hope, perhaps. We get the new moon. We get, the symbols of waxing, waning, like rebirth, right? Morning will come. Spring will come. We also get the cross here in the bottom right. The resurrection will also come, and it has come for Christ. So there are some things that allude to perhaps a more positive idea, but they're kind of subtle and more symbolic. But again, we get the symbol of the just idea of the sublime, the awesome, frightening force of nature. Kind of wants us to see God's presence in nature. More, like you could even argue, see God's presence in nature more so than even in the church, right? But again, kind of similar to maybe that just strong atmosphere, like Turner, and just those similar forces of nature, but very dissimilar in style, right? Friedrich's a bit more detailed. You get these harder lines, like these linear, versus the painterly nature of Turner. But landscape itself, and he's of course, Friedrich, if you can't tell, is a big landscape painter, is kind of a metaphor for the transience of life and the transience of human achievement. And again, with some ideas that are pretty common during this time, is nationalism. It's kind of part of that romantic movement. We do get people like Herder collected folk songs and made an anthology. Grimm brothers collected folk tales. We're searching for that shared past, which is meant to unite people more than an allegiance to an aristocracy, right? There is no Germany in 1810. We get this loose union of about 300 different German-speaking states. So there are kind of this hopes for unification that is crushed under Napoleon's rule at the time. So the Oaks and the Gothic Abbey, this may not be true, of course, but Goethe said that Gothic architecture originated in Germany. So it's kind of just symbolizes the demise of that hope for German nationalism, reflecting on the national mood at the time. It's kind of a state of national crisis. Of course, that won't last forever, but it's just kind of the idea. Here's more Caspar David Friedrich, the winter landscape. You get that church coming out of the mist in the distance. It almost seems fantastic. But in the foreground, of course, a man has discarded his crutches. If you can see the crutches here. And then if you can see the man, he is leaning against the rock. He kind of blends in with that tree there. But he sits praying before a crucifix, which also is coming out of the bushes there. The crucifix with Christ. He has abandoned his crutches and he's sitting there praying to the crucifix. That's honestly kind of hard to see at first. So it gives the painting a whole different feel in some regards. I feel like you could hang this in your house and half the people wouldn't even notice that it's Christian imagery here. But the rocks and the evergreen trees may be interpreted as symbols of faith amidst, the want of winter in many regards. But we do get the visionary Gothic cathedral emerging from the mist, kind of evokes the promise of life after death, right? Like the new grass under the snow. And forget about your ailments. There is healing and wholeness later. And then perhaps Friedrich's most famous painting, Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, just to show it to you. I have my copy of Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra has this on the cover of it. Very famous, very classic painting. He almost doesn't seem like the hiking type. But it's just like all one tone, because the clouds and the fog are the same, and you just get outcroppings of rock. You do get a lot, though, immediately in the foreground here where he is standing, and that's where the starkest juxtaposition is, but also just the back of the man against the landscape. Landscape is, well, nature is powerful, but man does have a place in it, right? Both are creations of God, perhaps the two most remarkable for either good or evil. And then looked at this briefly, but this is Friedrich's Woman at a Window from 1822. Bit different. The framing's so weird. It's almost so bleak, but then you get the window. Like, all the life is at the window, but also, of course, life is in the woman as well. But still, the vast majority of the canvas here is just a bleak wooden interior. So, and you can't quite tell what she's looking at. You can see the line of trees, the forest in the distance. Almost a sense of hope is found outside. It's found in nature, right? Here is Solitary Tree or Lone Tree as well. This feels almost American to me, like American West. That's the feel I get from it. With the mountains. Not that Germany doesn't have mountains, obviously, but still. I don't know. If you're American, does it remind you of the same thing? I don't know. Let me know. Perhaps I'm not the only one. But very beautiful. Caspar David Friedrich might be my favorite romantic artist between all nations. He's very, very talented. I love his work. Here's the Sea of Ice. This is very imposing. Again, that forces of nature. Where is the man in here? Well, presumably they may have gone out, but here's the ship being swallowed by the Sea of Ice. Does the Baltic ever look like this? I don't know. Never been. Let me know. Sure, if you go a bit further north it does, but I'm not sure about the Baltic itself. I thought it was relatively warm with the everything there, but regardless. And then I've been, just to give you more idea, this is a walk at dusk, but again, that symbolism with the moon here. And this is some of those like prehistoric tombs. Nature is almost the same, but in some regards, man can have an impact. This stuff has been here for thousands of years and was made by man. It's interesting to think about. Nature will always conquer. Man's stuff does not last. There is eternal things we should look at, like God, but there are things, man does have an impact. It may as well be an impact for good. And I'm not sure the sentiment with the Industrial Revolution was that we are impacting for good. It's filthy. It's dirty, right? So, it's just stuff to think about. I'm not going to go too deeply into it. This just gives you a general idea of Caspar David Friedrich. And I think he's very much worth looking at. So, highly recommend you look more into Friedrich in particular, but also German Romanticism, and not just the painting. I'll always recommend that you look at more than just the painting. Look at the poetry, look at the literature, look at the philosophy. If you're into it, I highly recommend it anyway, even if you're not into it. Look at the theology, look at the beliefs of the people. And soon, after the 19th century, those beliefs are going to be abandoned pretty heavily, and I don't think it does the world much good. But regardless, hope you guys have a good day, and please feel free to like and subscribe. I do greatly appreciate it, as well as comment, and I will see you guys next time.